All right. We do have a handful of our shade trees that we have planted around the grounds to give you a nice example of what that tree will look like given 3 years, 5 years, 20 years of growth. So Megan just pointed out the beautiful Kentucky coffee tree that we have that does a wonderful job of shading our checkout area and office in the morning and midday time. It also shades our patio area, which is just a nice place. If people are out shopping, they can take a little rest. And that shades that patio during the entire midday time. So a nice little circular patio over there. The Kentucky coffee tree has a large compound leaf, so it gives a nice filtered shade. It has a rough bark, which is really nice year-round. It is highly resistant to pollution and poor growing conditions, all of that kind of stuff. So you'll commonly see them being planted along the highways. Route 64 North Avenue, when they redid it, going from St. Charles into West Chicago, they planted Kentucky coffee tree right down the center median. I think it might be actually 6 lanes right there. So you've got 6 lanes of heavy traffic. It's right over there by the airport and everything. So a lot of commercial traffic, lots of trucks, tons of pollution, and they're doing great. Planted literally right in the middle of the street, right in the median. So beautiful Kentucky coffee tree. That's a real winner in my book. It's also nice because the dappled light that comes through it allows for underplanting. So you can have perennials or a lawn or shrubs underneath it, and they'll still do really well. This tree right here is a tulip tree. Tulip tree is for sure a staff favorite. I don't know if we have any staff members who don't have one at home, honestly, but the tulip tree is kind of a neat tree. It's unlike most other trees. It's got a unique leaf. It sort of looks like a mitten with 2 thumbs, so it kind of got a real unique leaf right there. This tree is just on the tail end of its bloom season, so we're going to kind of see if we can zoom in here. You can see that nice yellowy orange flower. As the name suggests, it has a really nice tulip shape to it. It started blooming in late May and has been blooming ever since, so probably about the 20th of May. Today's the 12th, so it's been blooming for sure for 3 weeks. The butterflies love it, the honeybees love it. Really a neat tree. I always like to let people know that it is not going to bloom until it's about 5 or 6 inches in trunk diameter or around 10 or 12 years old. That's a generalization. Sometimes they bloom just a little earlier. Sometimes it takes even a little longer to get them to bloom. But keep in mind, when we're selling a tree, oftentimes that tree is already 7 or 8 years old, depending upon what tree size you're starting with. We plant little tiny trees. In fact, here's a little tricolored beech here in a 5-gallon container. And this tree will sell retail out here in the garden center for someone to come and take with them. But this is also the size of the tree that we start with out in our nursery. So this little tree is about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, not including its potted root system, and it's on a little bamboo stake here. So we'll take a tree like this, plant this out into the field. If we want to get, say, a 2.5-inch trunk diameter tricolored beech, it is going to take us about 9 years from this size to get to a 2.5-inch tree. Now this happens to be one of the slower growing, slower to establish trees. So it also makes it a more expensive tree to get at that 2.5-inch size. A little faster growing tree like an elm or a maple is going to be less expensive at a 2.5-inch size than this beech, because we can turn that over in somewhere between 4 and 6 years, depending upon what size root system or what size liner, we start with. So some of our trees, 3, 4, 5 year turnaround, some of them 8, 9, 10 year turnaround, some of them like ginkgos and beech and things like that, they can take a long time to develop and establish themselves in the nursery. So, I know some people get a little dismayed when they get to the register here or they talk to our sales staff and we tell them, oh, hey, we're 6 weeks or we're 8 weeks out on tree planting right now, and they don't want to wait that long, but really they've been waiting so much longer, they just didn't know it. They've been waiting for 8 years. They've been waiting for 10 years. That tree's been growing in the nursery. That's how long it took. It might have been 2 years old by the time it gets to us. So when the propagating nursery that we get our liners from, it may be already a 2-year-old tree from them, and then we grow it on for another 4 or 6 years. So it may be 8 years old already or 10 years old already. So kind of a fun little deal there with the nursery production. So this is our swamp white oak tree that I had mentioned before, with about a 12-inch trunk diameter. You can see a job already of shading some of our shrubs around here. The reason that they call it, well, swamp, the name swamp comes from the fact that it's very tolerant of moist soil. So if you have a lower spot in the yard, if you've got an area where your property or the neighbor's properties drain into it or drain past it, and just, you know, in a normal growing season tends to be a little more soggy or something like that, this would be an excellent tree for you. Consequently, it's also exceptionally drought tolerant and can be planted in very dry soil. So it's a very versatile tree. Really traditional oak leaf, large rounded edges. Since it's a member of the white oak family, one of the ways you can differentiate, little quick botany lesson, one of the ways you can differentiate the white oak group from the red oak group is whether or not they have a little point out on the end of these lobes. So if it's in the white oak group, it's going to be smooth. There's going to be no little point out on the end. If it has a little point out on the end here, it's going to be in the red oak family. So this is swamp white oak, a member of the white oak family. Dark, glossy green top of the leaf. That dark glossiness makes it very drought tolerant. It really holds the moisture in there well. It's almost like a varnish, if you will. The bottom of the leaf has a fuzzy white appearance. So its botanical name, or its scientific name, is Quercus bicolor. And the reason they call it bicolor is because it's dark green on one side and white on the other. And when you look at the tree from a distance, it'd be very hard to show on Facebook or, you know, with just an iPhone camera. But you'll see it. You'll see both sides, because on some of the branches you're seeing the top of the leaf, and on some of them you're seeing the underside. So you have this sort of cool bicolor effect. Also has this really neat shaggy bark. So it's got a naturally exfoliating bark. So shaggy trunk, but the branches are going to be brown, gray, and I'm sure it's quite hard to see, but there's like little chunks of tan and white in there. So it has a lot of character to it. Very hardy. This is literally planted in garbage. I mean, you can see here, it's all covered in limestone gravel, which makes the soil pH very high. So this is very alkaline soil. Like I said, it is planted in garbage. We didn't do anything to amend this. This replaced an old ash tree. So in 2005, the emerald ash borer came through, was starting to kill all the ash trees. So in 2008, we took out an autumn purple ash that was growing beautifully right here. We took that out because it started to get ash borer. So in 2008, I planted this tree. It was only about 3 or 4 inches in diameter at the time. So in just, so 2008 to 21, so about 13 years, we have an absolutely gorgeous, very nice sized swamp white oak on our hands. So I always like to mention oaks because they kind of get a bad rap for being slow growing. And when you see the big old oak trees, and we have a couple of huge ones by our parking lot that are somewhere between 75 and 150 years old, when you see those, yeah, they took 150 years or whatever to get that large, but they get pretty big pretty fast. Oaks can grow anywhere from 12 to 24, maybe even 36 inches a year. So they can put on quite a bit of new growth. So that's the swamp white oak, really versatile, one of my favorites. So another recent addition to our landscape here is this elm tree that's right in front of us. So this elm tree, which is planted in a parking lot island, as you can see right there by our light pole, there was an old crabapple there. So the crabapple was planted in 1997 when we first redid our parking lot and added these islands. And that crabapple kind of went through its useful life, was starting to get kind of nasty. We decided to take that out. This elm tree has only been in the ground for 5 years. So if I had to guess, It's about 10 to 12, probably 12 inches in trunk diameter. It's as tall as the light pole. It's a solid 25, maybe 30 feet tall in just 5 years. So it was 3 inches in trunk diameter when we planted it, and it is now 12 inches in diameter. It's about 30 feet tall. Very nice dark green leaves. I always like to point this out. Elms get munched on by a lot of insects, and none of them really cause any issues. So you'll see some little pinholes and all that kind of stuff. This is completely harmless to the tree. We don't spray it. We don't do anything to it. But if you're looking for quick shade, or if you have crummy ground, the elm trees are a really good choice. All of our elms were bred and developed, for the most part, were bred and developed at Morton Arboretum. But all of them were bred and developed for Dutch elm disease resistance. So all of these have been tested for that. They are Dutch elm disease resistant trees. So Dutch elm disease, if you're not familiar with it, is a disease that came through and wiped out all of our American elms. So, you know, even around here, some of the near suburbs like Lombard and some of them had literally elm-lined streets where American elm lined the streets. And all of those trees died in the 50s, 60s, 70s from Dutch elm disease. The good news is Dutch elm disease is still here, but the good news is we have Dutch elm disease resistant trees. So you can get that American elm look. They're all hybrids. They're Dutch elm disease resistant. They grow exceptionally fast. This particular one right here is called Frontier. Frontier gets kind of a burgundy-ish fall color. It's going to get about 40 to 45 feet high, with a nice sort of vase shape to it. So the elm is a really, really nice shade tree, especially for quick shade. While we're here in the parking lot, I want to show you our other recent addition to the parking lot. So all of our parking lot trees that were planted in '97 have now been replaced. This is a dawn redwood right here. So not a tree that you commonly think about for providing shade, but it's actually an excellent shade tree. It's going to get about 40 feet tall. It's going to get about 30 feet wide. It keeps sort of an upright, you know, kind of sort of rounded at the bottom, slowly tapering. So not quite pyramidal, but a little more rounded at the bottom. But I want to just show you this foliage. So this is a tree that is, in the scientific world, we would consider this a deciduous conifer. So deciduous meaning it's going to lose its leaves during the winter time, just like the elms and the oaks that we just looked at. But conifer meaning that it's a cone-bearing plant, like a pine or a spruce. So it does develop cones. There probably are a few somewhere way up at the top. They're already starting to form, but it has this beautiful, soft, graceful texture. Really interesting peeling bark with kind of an orangey reddish tinge to it, which is really nice. It turns kind of a rusty pinky orange color in the fall. So really pretty fall color, really adaptable tree. It can take average soils to moist soils, relatively fast growing. I mean, already this year, planted in a parking lot island in a hot, dry year, we've got an easy 8 inches of new growth already down here at the bottom. I would venture to guess that up at the top we probably already have closer to 12 inches of new growth on this tree. We can plant it and you will have instant shade. I think we might be having a technical glitch.
Now we're good.
We're good? Okay. So the autumn blaze maple here is one of our fastest growing trees, 2 to 3 feet of growth per year, bright red fall color. You can literally plant it anywhere. Really dry soil, no problem. Really wet soil, no problem. Exceptional growth rate, very hardy. Pyramidal habit mostly, so about 40 to 50 feet tall, 20, 25, maybe 30 on the width. One of our most popular trees, very, very fast growing. That's a really nice one there.
And not fall on their face while I'm
So at any given time, we have somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 trees above ground ready to plant. Our shade tree selection is absolutely fantastic. We have elms and oaks and catalpas and sweet gum and tulip trees and linden and just about everything out there that's hardy in our area. We also have shade trees in smaller sizes that you can take home and plant yourself. So this is a tulip tree, just like we showed right towards the beginning there. So this is in a 7-gallon container. You could take that home, get that in the yard, and have a shade tree today. Or you could have us come and plant something that's going to be a little bit larger, like one of these in here. So we've got all different sizes to choose from, going all the way up to some of these really large 4-inch diameter. 4-inch diameter is about as big as we can move by hand. So you can get, again, instant shade tree. Keep in mind a balled and burlapped tree is going to be a little thinner its first year. So the first year that it's dug, it's going to have a little less foliage than it does when it's well established. So might look a little sparse the first season, but they'll really fill out nicely. So that's a tulip tree. And right over here, I wanted to point out a tree called an American Century Linden. So the American Century Linden is one of our more narrow trees. In fact, we've been growing more of these because I like to use this tree as a replacement for the pear trees. So you've heard me talk about it before. Pear trees are an invasive tree here. So the calorie pears like Chanticleer and Aristocrat and Autumn Blaze pear and all of those are, they're an invasive species. They have a disease problem called fire blight. They were very heavily planted in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and now most of them are dying. But a lot of people like that really tight, narrow, upright profile. Maybe they're planting a little closer to the house or street or driveway or patio. So the American Century Linden is a really good pear replacement. It has a heart-shaped leaf. It has a little yellow flower in the summer, which has a sweet fragrance to it. It keeps a very nice upright profile. It'll get around 30 to 35 feet tall and about 15-ish feet wide. So very nice for near the house, near a patio, deck, that type of thing. So that's the American Century Linden. We had a Facebook post a couple of days ago about the ivory silk or the Japanese tree lilacs, which are blooming right over here now. They're a flowering shade tree. They're only going to get about 25 feet tall, so they're not a large shade tree, but they provide a nice amount of shade. They also have beautiful flowers, really strong fragrance. In fact, when we were standing over by the linden, you can smell the lilacs from across the aisle over there, so that's really a nice tree. A couple of less common shade trees. This is our beautiful native northern catalpa. So ginormous, big, almost heart-shaped leaves. When the tree is healthy and in the ground and doing well, the leaves may be 8 or 10, maybe even 12 inches across, so really large leaves. But one of the highlights of this tree are these beautiful white, almost orchid-like flowers. I'm going to kind of pull this branch down a little bit and sort of zoom in there. So they've got these beautiful little, they really do almost look like an orchid with this nice deep throat in there, a little yellow. There's some purple dots in there. So really a neat tree. You're going to see you've got all of those buds haven't opened yet. So it's just starting to bloom. It's a native tree. They're very, very hardy. They get massive. They're going to get 60 to 70 feet tall eventually. They're very long-lived. They're relatively disease and insect free. But if you've got some room, it's a really, really pretty tree. We also have a neat version of it, which is going to be hard to see on the iPhone. But this is a catalpa called purple catalpa, and the leaves in the spring come out burgundy. So the whole tree in the spring is burgundy, and then the leaves mature to green. But the new growth is always burgundy. So if you could see it up at the tips, all of the leaves are still burgundy. So that's the new growth. All the new growth is going to be burgundy, and then it'll mature to a green leaf. So it does the same thing. It has the white flowers and all that the northern catalpa has that we just looked at, but you've got the added benefit of that purple color. So that's kind of a neat one. Speaking of purple, this was the most recent addition to our parking lot island planting is a Riverside or Rivers Purple Beech. I didn't walk up there and show it to you because it's just right on Route 64 and the traffic noise right along the road there is pretty tough. But this is what we just planted in that island. This is one of my favorite trees. A little faster growing than some of the other beech. Nice dark burgundy, almost black when it's doing really well, almost black in color. Unlike the tricolor beech, these leaves are not damaged by the sun. So tricolor beech can get a little crispy along the edges during the late summer when the sun is really intense and it starts to get dry. But the Rivers beech really holds up great. I think one of the coolest things about it is its bark, which really, as the tree matures, almost takes on a texture. It looks a lot like elephant skin. You know, as it's growing, it's not like perfectly flat and smooth. It's got bumps and this texture to it that really looks a lot like elephant skin. It's really a neat tree. Morton Arboretum has some absolutely beautiful old ones just on the east side of their the Ginkgo Center, which is sort of the cafe and gift shop area. So there's a whole beech collection just off to the side of that, which is really, really pretty. And they've got some other beech elsewhere, but beautiful if you want to see some nice mature ones. A couple others here. This is a tree called Moraine Sweetgum. Really a neat tree with this star-shaped leaf. So it's got a very unique leaf, sort of maple looking, but not quite. Dark green and glossy. For sure one of our best fall coloring trees. Starts off a yellowy orange and then goes to a very, very bright red. The fall color is absolutely fantastic. Moraine is the hardiest of the sweet gum, so we're right at the northern edge of the range where sweet gum will grow. But Moraine is about 5 to even 10 or 12 degrees more cold hardy than most of the other sweet gums. So really noted for its cold hardiness. That's a really great tree. And right over here, if you're looking for a smaller shade tree, this whole section, these are all horse chestnuts, and there might be a buckeye mixed in here, which is all the same family. But so this one right here is called Autumn Splendor. So the horse chestnuts and buckeyes, I tend to put them in the small shade tree category, around 30-ish feet tall. Big, beautiful flowers, though. They're already done blooming. They were blooming in May. Big cone-shaped flowers. Depending upon the variety, they're either white, creamy yellow, or kind of a pinkish red. So really pretty trees. Neat compound leaf. So it's got this 5-star leaf on there. Really kind of a neat texture and neat look to it. If you look up here, that's where the flower was. So this is going to be the horse chestnut itself. So that's going to be the nut, which the squirrels will eat and that type of thing. But that was where the flower was. So really neat tree, cool bark, kind of a diamond-shaped pattern on the bark. But really a very pretty tree and a really nice one if you want something that's a little bit smaller. Oh, that's a great question. Do we have one? Okay. So the question is about lichen on tree bark. So you can see this kind of mustardy color stuff growing on here. Sometimes you'll see it's like a gray-green color. Sometimes it's bright yellow. Sometimes it's even orange. So lichen is a moss and an algae growing on top of one another. So we call it a symbiotic relationship. So they're growing on top of one another, and they grow on rocks. They could grow on a house or a brick. They can grow on stones. They are perfectly harmless. There is nothing you need to do to treat them. In fact, they are typically the sign of a healthy environment because lichen are very sensitive to pollution and damage and things like that. So you will see them typically on the whole tree was bright red. That new growth is really, really vibrant. So in the spring, the whole tree is red. Now, as the older leaves have matured to a green, you're just seeing out here at the tips all of this bright red new growth. Can take a little more moist soil to average soil. It again is a smaller tree, around 30 feet tall. Really, probably the best fall coloring tree though we have in the garden center right now. bright orangey red, glossy foliage. Really a very pretty tree. Like I said, it's an Illinois native. In fact, I came across, you don't see it in the wild very often here in northern Illinois, but I came across a beautiful native stand about a mile north of here, right near Lake Campton. Just a beautiful planting of it that is, there's probably 20 or 30 trees in this stand, and they're absolutely gorgeous in the fall. And that glossy leaf holds up really well to the heat of summer and drought and wind and all that kind of stuff. So this is one of my personal favorites, small shade tree called Wildfire Tupelo. There's so many other choices. I mean, we literally, I don't even know if we have walked a quarter of our shade tree section. We have oaks, we have maples, we have locust, coffee tree, plane tree, which are sycamores, we have hornbeam and ironwood and so many others. So there's a lot of options. We just don't have the time to go through and talk about every single one of them. But we have plenty of time if you want to come in and talk about it. But you also have all the time in the world to look at our website. So look at those two resources that I mentioned. The first one being wasconursery.com/trees. You're going to get those full color handouts. You can print those out. You can bring them into the garden center and say, hey, I'm looking at these 3 trees. Can you show them to me? It's a really great resource. The other thing you can do is go to our plant finder. So plant finder again is the tool on our website that allows you to put in your search criteria, and it's going to tell you what tree options meet that criteria. So I want a tree that's going to be 30 feet tall and turn bright red in the fall, and Wildfire Tupelo will be one of those trees. So again, tons of options. We've only covered just a little bit. I wanted to show you some of my favorites. I showed you some of the ones that we have planted here in the landscape. We have other examples planted in the landscape as well. We have a beautiful plane tree, which is basically a sycamore. We have some gorgeous bald cypresses planted here. We do have an American Century linden, which I showed you growing in this, the ones that we have for sale. But we have a beautiful one of those planted that's nice and mature, so you can see that shape that I mentioned is similar